You think you understand betrayal until your own parents turn you into a line item they need to cut. You believe family is a given until you are lying in a hospital bed and they walk away without looking back. And you think justice comes from a private fight until a dean reads your name before thousands of people, and the woman who gave birth to you freezes like she has just been caught in a spotlight. My name is Layla Rios, and I am 28 years old. I stood in the heavy, dusty shadows behind the velvet curtains of the university auditorium, listening to the sound of 3,000 people on the other side. It did not sound like applause. From back here, without the context of sight, the noise sounded like water crashing against a retaining wall, a chaotic and hungry roar that wanted to pull everything into itself. The air backstage smelled of old wood, stale coffee, and the high-voltage ozone scent of hot stage lights. My graduation gown was heavy on my shoulders, a synthetic weight that felt less like a robe of academic distinction and more like armor. I looked down at my right hand. My thumb traced the surface of the silver ring on my ring finger. It was not an expensive piece of jewelry. The metal was slightly tarnished around the edges, and the design was simple, just 2 letters interlaced in a flowing script that you had to squint to read properly. But it was the only thing I was wearing that actually mattered. It was a gift from the woman who had taught me how to walk again, metaphorically and literally. It was a gift from my mother, not the woman who gave birth to me, but the woman who saved me from her. I exhaled slowly, letting the breath hiss out through my teeth. I felt like I was holding an entire lifetime in my lungs, 15 years of silence compressed into a diamond-hard point of resolve. And now, the voice of the dean boomed through the massive speakers, vibrating the floorboards beneath my heels. Please welcome the valedictorian of the class of 2025, a recipient of the Dean's Medal for Compassionate Medicine, Dr. Layla Rios. That was the cue. Most people think that revenge is loud. They think it looks like a screaming match in a parking lot or a drink thrown in a crowded bar. They are wrong. Real justice, the kind that settles into your bones and changes the temperature of a room, is quiet. It is precise. It is a surgeon walking into an operating theater with a scalpel that has been sharpened for a decade and a half. I stepped out from the wings. The light hit me first. It was a physical force, a wall of white heat that erased the world for a fraction of a second. I blinked, letting my pupils adjust, and then the auditorium resolved into focus. It was a sea of black mortarboards and colorful sashes, a mosaic of faces upturned in expectation. They were cheering. They were clapping. They saw a success story standing at the podium. They saw a young woman who had overcome the odds to graduate at the top of her medical school class. They saw the American dream wrapped in doctoral velvet, but I was not looking at the students. I was not looking at the faculty. I was scanning the VIP section, the reserved rows near the front where the families of the honorees sat. I knew exactly where to look, because I was the one who had assigned the seats. Row 4, seats A and B, and there they were. Kara Hartwell, my biological mother. She was wearing a floral dress that was a little too tight around the waist, the kind of thing you wear to a garden party to show off that you are still trying. Her hair was dyed a shade of blonde that did not exist in nature, but the harsh theater lights were unforgiving. I could see the gray roots clawing their way out. A testament to the time that had passed since she last cared enough to maintain the facade. She was clutching the graduation program with both hands, twisting the glossy paper into a tube. Her knuckles were white. Next to her sat Glenn Hartwell, my biological father. He was wearing a navy suit that looked 2 sizes too big, the shoulders slumping as if the fabric itself was tired. He was looking around the room with a wide, tight smile, nodding at people who were not looking at him. It was the look of a man who was waiting to take credit for a project he had not worked on. He looked like a man who had won a lottery ticket he had found in the gutter and was terrified someone would ask to see the receipt. They saw me. Kara's hands stopped twisting the program. She froze. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, the smile on her face faltered. It was a micro-expression, a flicker of genuine terror. Before the mask slammed back into place, she sat up straighter. She beamed. She elbowed Glenn. pointing at me as if to say, "Look, there she is. We made that." They thought they were safe. They thought this invite was an olive branch. They thought that after 15 years of silence, my success had softened my memory. They believed that by inviting them here, to the biggest moment of my life, I was signaling a desire to reconnect. They thought they were going to get a tearful reunion, a dinner at a nice steakhouse afterwards where I would pick up the check, and perhaps, eventually, access to the doctor's salary I was about to start earning. They looked at me and saw an ATM machine with a heartbeat. I placed my hands on the sides of the wooden podium. It was cool and solid. I leaned into the microphone. The feedback whined for a split second before settling into a hum. The crowd quieted down, the rustle of fabric and the coughing fading into an anticipatory silence. I looked directly at Kara. I did not blink. I am not here to offer them forgiveness. I am not here to offer them a bridge back into my life. I am here to offer them the one thing they denied me when I was 13 years old and dying in a hospital bed. I am here to offer them the truth. This is not a reconciliation. This is a reckoning. You think you understand what abandonment feels like. You watch movies where a parent walks out the door with a suitcase, leaving a weeping child in the hallway. That is the romanticized version. That is the version where the parent at least has the decency to say goodbye. The reality is much colder. The reality is bureaucratic. The reality smells like industrial floor cleaner and stale cafeteria food. I am going to tell you a story. It is not the story they are expecting. They are expecting me to thank them for my genes, for the sacrifices they made by existing, but I am going to take everyone in this room back to a Tuesday in October. 15 years ago, I want you to imagine a room with beige walls and no windows. The kind of room where bad news is delivered because it is easier to clean up afterward. I was 13 years old. I was sitting on the edge of an exam table, swinging my legs because they were too short to touch the floor. I remember the sound of the paper crinkling underneath me. It was the loudest sound in the world. The doctor was a kind man with tired eyes. He had just used words like acute lymphoblastic leukemia and immediate aggressive induction therapy. He had just told a teenage girl that her blood was trying to kill her. Most parents, in that moment, would ask if their child was going to live. They would ask about pain. They would ask about the side effects. They would reach out and hold their child's hand, anchoring them to the earth while their world spun off its axis. My parents did not touch me. They did not look at me. Glenn Hartwell looked at the doctor. He did not blink. He did not cry. He took a calculator out of his breast pocket. I remember this detail so vividly it makes my stomach turn. And he punched in a few numbers. "How much?" he asked. That was the question. Not will she survive? Not can we save her? How much is this going to cost us out of pocket? I remember the silence that followed. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. The doctor blinked, confused, thinking he had misunderstood. He started to explain about insurance caps and payment plans and the sliding scale of the hospital charity fund. But Kara cut him off. She looked at the wall, refusing to make eye contact with the doctor or with me. She smoothed her skirt, picking at a piece of lint that wasn't there. "We have a reputation in this town," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any moisture. "We are not going to be the family that begs for handouts. We are not going to bankrupt our future for a losing bet." A losing bet. That is what she called me. I was sitting 3 feet away from her. I could reach out and touch her arm, but she talked about me as if I were a car that had been totaled, and she was arguing with the mechanic about whether it was worth the salvage value. I looked at them then, really looked at them, and I realized something that no child should ever have to realize. I realized that to them. I was not a person, I was a liability. I was a red line on a ledger that they wanted to erase. They left me there. They did not just leave the room. They left the hospital. They left the legal guardianship. They signed the papers with the speed of people canceling a gym membership they no longer used. They walked out to the parking lot, got into their sedan, and drove away to focus on their viable investment, my older sister, leaving me to face the needles and the nausea and the terror of death. with nothing but a hospital gown and a stuffed bear a nurse gave me. But there is something they do not know. There is a detail about that day that has been buried in the archives of the state records for 15 years. There is a single piece of paper, a carbon copy of a document that was generated during the chaotic transition of my custody. It is a document that Glenn and Kara Hartwell believe does not exist. They believe they covered their tracks. They believe that their narrative, the one where they were the tragic victims of a system that stole their daughter, is the only one that survived. They are wrong. I have the document. I have kept it safe, hidden away, waiting for the moment when the statute of limitations on their lies ran out. It captures a specific action they took 48 minutes after leaving my bedside, an action that moves their crime from moral abandonment to criminal fraud. It is the smoking gun that proves they did not just leave me to die. They tried to profit from my death before I was even dead. I looked down at them from the podium. Glenn was still smiling, but the edges of his mouth were starting to tremble. He could sense the shift in the air. He could feel the temperature dropping. He was realizing that the silence in the room was not the silence of awe, but the silence of a predator watching its prey step into a trap. I am not going to scream at them. I am not going to cry. Tears are for people who are hurt, and I am not hurt anymore. I am healed. I am a doctor. I fix things. And sometimes, fixing things means cutting out the rot so the healthy tissue can survive. They came here today for a photo op. They came here to stand in the glow of my spotlight and absorb some of the warmth. Well, they are going to get the spotlight. I took a breath, the air tasting sweet and cold in my lungs. I am not going to shame them. Shame implies they have a conscience capable of feeling it. I am simply going to do what you do when you hear a noise in the basement and you want to see what is hiding in the dark. I am just going to turn on the lights. The calendar on the wall of the examination room said it was October 23rd. I remember looking at it because the image above the dates was a pumpkin patch, bright orange and festive, which felt like a cruel joke compared to the bruised, violet landscape of my own skin. I was sitting on the crinkling paper of the exam table at Cedar Ridge Children's Pavilion. The air conditioning was humming a low, aggressive drone that made the hair on my arms stand up. It smelled of isopropyl alcohol and that distinct, metallic scent of anxiety that seems to seep into the dry wall of every hospital. I was 13 years old, and I felt heavy. My bones felt like lead pipes filled with sand. I had spent the last 3 weeks sleeping 18 hours a day and waking up with new bruises on my legs that I could not explain. Doctor. Aris Thorne sat on a rolling stool in front of me. He was a young man, perhaps in his early 30s, with kind eyes that looked too tired for the morning shift. He held a clipboard against his chest, shielding us from the data, but he lowered it slowly as he looked at my parents. He did not mince words. He told us that my white blood cell count was catastrophic. He used the term acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He explained that my bone marrow was essentially producing errors instead of soldiers. I stopped breathing for a moment. I waited for the room to explode. In the movies, this is when the mother wails and collapses into the father's arms. This is when the father demands to see a specialist and vows to tear the world apart to save his little girl. My mother, Kara, did not wail. She was sitting in the corner chair, her legs crossed at the ankle, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on her beige slacks. When the doctor finished speaking, she looked at the wall clock. My father, Glenn, cleared his throat. It was a dry, businesslike sound. "So, what are we looking at here?" Glenn asked. "Doctor?" Thorne blinked, clearly assuming Glenn was asking about the prognosis. The doctor leaned forward, his voice earnest. "The survival rate is actually very high for this demographic. Mr. Hartwell, with the current protocols, we are looking at a survival rate of nearly 90%. It is a long road. The treatment protocol lasts about 2.5 to 3 years. It is aggressive, and it needs to start immediately, like today. But Layla can beat this." Glenn held up a hand, palm facing the doctor, stopping him mid-sentence. "No," Glenn said, his voice flat. "I meant the financials. What are we looking at in terms of cost? What is the deductible spread over 3 years? Does the insurance cover the inpatient stays at 100%? Or is there a copay cap? Doctor, Thorne froze. I saw his grip tighten on the clipboard until his knuckles turned white. He looked from Glenn to me, and then back to Glenn. Mr. Hartwell, the doctor said slowly, his tone dropping an octave. We are discussing your daughter's life. The hospital has a financial counselor who can go over the billing specifics later. Right now, we need to discuss the induction phase of chemotherapy. Glenn shook his head. He pulled a small notepad from his jacket pocket. I do not do anything without seeing the numbers, he said. We have a high deductible plan. We are looking at, $10,000 out of pocket per year? Plus medications? Plus the cost of her not being in school? I sat there, swinging my legs, feeling the cold seep into my marrow. I looked at my mother. Mom, I whispered. Kara finally turned her head, but she did not look at me. She looked through me. She looked past my pale face and my terrified eyes and focused on the window behind me. If she stays here for weeks, Kara said, her voice trembling slightly, not with sorrow, but with irritation. People are going to talk. The neighbors will see the car gone. They will ask questions. I do not want the rumor mill churning that the Hartwells are dealing with a tragedy. It makes us look weak. It impacts Glenn's standing at the firm if he is distracted by a domestic crisis. I felt a sting behind my eyes that had nothing to do with the cancer. My sister, Brianna, was sitting on the other side of the room. She was 16, glowing with health. Her hair perfect, her nails perfect. She had not looked up from her phone once since we entered the room. Her thumbs were flying across the screen. Can we hurry this up? Brianna said, popping a piece of gum. I have a meeting with the college counselor at 2. If I am late, it messes up my timeline for the early decision application to Yale. Brianna, honey, we will make it, Kara said soothingly, her voice instantly warmer than it had been when discussing my leukemia. Doctor, Thorne stood up. The wheels of his stool screeched against the linoleum. He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a brochure. Listen to me, the doctor said, and his voice was hard now. We have programs. We have the St. Jude affiliate program. We have state grants. We have payment plans that can stretch this out for 20 years, if money is the issue. We can fix it. You do not have to pay a dime up front. We treat the child first. We figure out the money later. That is how this hospital works. We are not going to let a billing code stand in the way of Layla surviving. I felt a spark of hope. The doctor was offering them an out. He was giving them a way to be heroes without spending a penny. Glenn stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at the brochure in the doctor's hand with a look of pure disgust. We do not take charity, Glenn said. The Hartwells do not fill out grant applications like beggars. If we cannot pay for it, we do not buy it. That is the principle we live by. But this isn't a car. Mr. Hartwell. Doctor. Thorne's voice rose. This is your daughter. Glenn looked at me then. It was the first time he had made eye contact with me since we entered the room. His eyes were devoid of warmth. They were calculation engines, assessing risk and reward. We have a college fund, Glenn said. It has taken us 18 years to build it. It is earmarked for Brianna. She is on the track to the Ivy League. She is going to be a lawyer or a senator. He paused, and the silence stretched so tight I thought it would snap and take my head off. Layla is average, Glenn said. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. Average. She gets B-minuses, Glenn continued, listing my failures like crimes. She is not athletic. She has no distinct talents. She is perfectly average. He turned back to the doctor. I am not going to liquidate Brianna's future to pay for a treatment that might not even work for Layla. It is a bad investment. You are asking me to burn the house down to save the garage. My heart stopped. I mean that literally, for a second. The monitor beside me beeped a warning because my heart rate plummeted. He had just weighed my life against my sister's tuition, and I had come up short. I slid off the table, My knees were shaking so hard I had to grab the edge of the mattress to stay upright. "Dad?" I said. My voice sounded tiny, like a ghost in the room. Glenn did not answer. "Mom?" I turned to Kara. "Mom, please, I am scared. I do not want to die." I reached out for her hand. I just wanted her to hold me. I wanted her to tell Glenn to stop talking, to tell him that I was her baby and that nothing else mattered. Kara flinched away from my touch, as if I were contagious. She stood up, brushing off her skirt again. "Layla, stop it," she hissed. "You are making a scene. Being scared is a part of life. You have to learn to deal with it. Do not be selfish. Do not drag this whole family down just because you are sick. You heard your father. We have plans for Brianna. We cannot derail everything just because you have bad luck." She looked at me with cold, hard eyes. "You need to be strong enough to accept the reality of the situation," she said. "The reality?" The reality was that they were negotiating my death because I wasn't the star pupil. "Doctor?" Thorne stepped between us. He was not just a doctor anymore. He was a wall. He was breathing hard, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Get out." "Doctor?" Thorne said. "Excuse me?" Glenn looked offended. "I said get out of my office." "Doctor," Thorne said, his voice shaking with suppressed violence. "You are declining life-saving treatment for a minor based on financial preference. That is medical neglect. That is abuse. This is no longer a family discussion. This is a legal matter," Glenn scoffed. "You cannot force us to treat her. We have rights. You have the right to remain silent." "Doctor," Thorne snapped, "I am calling Child Protective Services immediately. I am placing Layla under a 72-hour emergency medical hold. She stays here. You leave, and if you try to take her out of this hospital, I will have security arrest you before you reach the elevator." Brianna finally looked up from her phone. "Does this mean we can go?" she asked, looking bored. "The Wi-Fi in here is terrible." Glenn grabbed his briefcase. "You are making a mistake. Doctor, you are going to hear from my attorney. You cannot just seize a child because we disagree with your pricing model. It is not a pricing model." "Doctor," Thorne shouted, "it is a human being." Glenn turned to me one last time. He did not look sad. He looked disappointed. The way one looks at a flat tire on a rainy morning. "You see what you caused?" he said to me. "You always have to be the difficult one." Kara grabbed her purse. "Let us go." "Glenn, this place smells awful. We will deal with this from home." They turned their backs. I watched them walk toward the door. I watched the back of my mother's floral blouse. I watched the back of my father's expensive suit. I watched my sister checking her reflection in the glass of the door. They did not look back. Not once. They walked out of that room and out of my life with the casual ease of people leaving a restaurant because the wait time was too long. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I stood there, shivering in my thin hospital gown, the tears finally spilling over, hot and stinging on my cheeks. "Doctor." Thorne turned to me. The rage vanished from his face, replaced by a profound, aching sorrow. He knelt down so he was at eye level with me. "Layla," he said softly. I looked at him, my vision blurred. Am I really not worth it?" I asked. The question tore out of my throat, raw and bleeding. "Doctor." Thorne reached out and took my hands. His hands were warm. "You are worth everything," he said fiercely, "and we are going to fight this. But right now, I need you to be brave. I need you to sit in this chair and wait while I make a phone call. Can you do that for me?" I nodded. I did not have a choice. I sat in the hard plastic chair, pulling my knees up to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. I watched him pick up the phone on the wall. I heard him say the words, emergency custody and immediate intervention. I closed my eyes. I could still hear the echo of Glenn's voice in the room. "She is average." I realized then that the cancer was not the only thing killing me. The real disease was the realization that the people who were supposed to love me had done the math, run the numbers, and decided that I was a line item they could afford to delete. I sat there and waited for the strangers from the state to come and collect me, while the ghost of my family's rejection settled around my shoulders like a shroud. The first night in the pediatric oncology ward was not silent. You would expect a hospital at night to be quiet, a place of rest, but it was alive with a mechanical, rhythmic breathing that was far more terrifying than any scream. I lay in the bed, the sheets stiff with industrial starch, scratching against my legs. The room was dim, lit only by the greenish glow of the monitors and the strip of fluorescent light bleeding in from the hallway under the door. To my left, the IV pump hummed. It was a rhythmic, grinding noise, followed by a soft click, and then the sound of liquid moving through plastic tubing. Click, whir, drip, click, whir, drip. It sounded like a countdown. It sounded like a bomb timer strapped to a stick of dynamite. Only the dynamite was inside my bones. I stared up at the ceiling tiles. I counted the little perforations in the acoustic foam, 142 in the corner tile alone. If I kept counting, I did not have to think. If I kept counting, I did not have to replay the image of the back of my father's suit jacket as the elevator doors closed. But the counting did not work. The silence between the machine noises was filled with a question that was louder than the diagnosis. Leukemia was a word I could look up in a dictionary. I could understand cells and marrow and toxins, but unwanted? There was no medical textbook for that. I was 13 years old, and I realized, with a clarity that cut through the fog of exhaustion, that my biggest fear was not the cancer eating my blood. My biggest fear was that if I died in this bed tonight, the only people who would be inconvenienced were the hospital billing department. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, but my breath hitched in my chest. It felt like there was a stone in my throat, jagged and sharp. The door handle turned. I froze, my eyes snapping open. I expected the doctors again, or the social worker with her pitying eyes and her clipboard full of forms that confirmed I was a ward of the state. But it was a nurse. She slipped into the room with the practiced silence of someone who had spent half her life walking on linoleum floors while others slept. She was not like the other nurses I had seen earlier, the ones who bustled around with forced cheerfulness. She moved with a calm, deliberate gravity. She looked to be about 35. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, practical ponytail that kept every strand out of her face. Her scrubs were navy blue, crisp and clean. She walked over to the monitors, checking the readouts, her eyes scanning the data with professional efficiency. Then she turned to me. Her name tag said Marisol Vega, RN. She did not smile. She did not give me that sad, tilted head look that says, "Oh, you poor thing." She looked me straight in the eyes. It was a direct, unwavering gaze that felt like it was reading the temperature of my soul rather than my body. For the first time all day, I did not feel like a problem to be solved or a cost to be calculated. I felt seen. "You are awake," she stated. It was not a question. Her voice was low and warm, like wood smoke. I nodded, clutching the thin blanket up to my chin. "Cannot sleep?" she asked. Moving to the side of the bed. "No," I whispered. She glanced at the chart hanging at the foot of my bed. She knew. Of course she knew. The whole floor probably knew by now about the girl whose parents had walked out because the return on investment was not high enough. She placed the chart back on the hook. She rested her hands on the plastic railing of the bed and leaned in slightly. "I know what happened today." "Layla," she said. I flinched. I wanted to curl into a ball and disappear. I did not want to talk about it. Marisol did not back away. She kept her voice steady. "What they did," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the door where my parents had exited my life, "is not normal." I looked at her, surprised by the bluntness. "It is not normal," she repeated, enunciating every word. "It is not how families work. It is not how people work. But I need you to know something right now. Before we start this shift, you are here, I am here, and you are not alone in this room. The dam broke. I did not mean for it to happen. I tried to bite my lip, tried to hold it back, but the tears came like a sudden summer storm, hot and fast. A sob ripped out of my chest. An ugly, jagged sound that echoed in the quiet room. I waited for her to hush me. I waited for the standard adult response. Don't cry. It will be okay. Be brave. Marisol did not say a word. She reached out and grabbed the visitor's chair, the empty chair where my mother should have been sitting. She dragged it right up to the side of the bed. The metal legs scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that grounded me. She sat down. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pack of tissues. She pulled one out and held it toward me. She did not try to stop me. She sat there, her back straight, her presence solid and unmoving. Witnessing my grief, she gave me permission to fall apart. I cried until my ribs ached. I cried for the fear of the needles. I cried for the white blood cells that were betraying me. But mostly, I cried for the little girl who had realized that she was average, and that being average was a capital offense in the Hartwell household. When the sobs finally turned into hiccuping gasps, Marisol handed me another tissue. Better? She asked. No, I croaked. Good, she said. It is not supposed to feel better yet. It is supposed to hurt. If it did not hurt, I would be worried about you. She leaned back in the chair, crossing her legs. I hate this place, I whispered. I know, she said. I hate it too sometimes. I looked at her, surprised. You work here. I do. She agreed, but I spent a lot of time in rooms just like this one. On the other side of the railing, my younger brother, Mateo, he had osteosarcoma, bone cancer. He was 11. I wiped my nose with the shredded tissue. Is he okay? Marisol paused for a second. A shadow passed over her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He had a hard time, she said. We practically lived in the hospital for 2 years. I did my homework in the waiting room. I learned to sleep in those terrible chairs that pull out into beds. I looked at her hands. They were strong hands, with short, clean nails. I hesitated, the question burning on my tongue. It was a cruel question, but I had to know. I had to know if the world was just full of monsters, or if my parents were a special breed. Did your parents leave him? I asked. Marisol's eyes narrowed slightly. Not at me, but at the idea. No, she said firmly. My chest tightened. Did they have money? I asked. My dad said, he said it cost too much. He said it was a bad investment. Marisol let out a breath, a sharp exhalation through her nose. My parents were immigrants. Layla. My father was a mechanic. My mother cleaned houses. We did not have a college fund. We did not have stocks. Then how? I asked. How did they pay? Marisol leaned forward again. Her dark eyes bored into mine. They sold the truck, she said. Then they sold the house, and we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with my aunt. My dad took double shifts. My mom took night shifts. They stood in line at charities. They fought with insurance companies on the phone for hours every single night. She reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Her fingers were cool. They sold almost everything they owned to keep his heart beating. She said, because that is what parents do. Layla, when your kid is sick, you do not look at the bank account. You look at the kid. You burn the world down if you have to, just to keep them warm. I felt a fresh wave of tears, but these were different. They were not tears of abandonment. They were tears of mourning for what I should have had. I had always thought my family was normal. I thought everyone's parents talked about ROI and brand management at the dinner table. I thought love was conditional on performance. Marisol had just shattered that illusion. And in shattering it, she had validated me. It wasn't that I wasn't worth saving. It was that they weren't capable of saving me. Marisol checked her watch. All right, enough deep talk for the first rounds, she said, standing up. The doctor has you on fluids to flush your kidneys before they start the chemo tomorrow. You need to stay hydrated. Do you want water? Yes, please, I said. She walked to the small sink in the corner. I like it cold, I said instinctively. At home, I always had to put exactly 3 ice cubes in my water. If I put in 4, my mother would complain about the noise of the ice clinking. If I put in 2, it wasn't cold enough. It was a habit I had developed to avoid criticism. Marisol returned with a plastic cup. It was full of crushed ice and water. The outside was already frosting over. "Ice water," she said. "The best medicine we have that does not require a prescription." I took a sip. It was perfect. It shocked my throat and made me feel awake. My mother never knew how I liked my water. I realized, in 13 years, she had never once handed me a glass of water without me asking, and she certainly never knew the ice ratio. Marisol did not leave. She pulled a deck of cards out of her pocket. "Do you know how to play gin rummy?" she asked. I shook my head. Brianna played chess. My father said card games were for people who relied on luck rather than skill. "Good," Marisol said, shuffling the deck with a professional bridge. "Then I can teach you, and I can probably beat you for the first few hands until you catch on. It will help pass the time. The monitors are too loud when you are just staring at them." She dealt the cards on the rolling bedside table. For the next 2 hours, we played. We did not talk about cancer. We did not talk about Glenn or Kara. We talked about school. Marisol told me about a cat she used to have that was afraid of cucumbers. She told me a joke about a skeleton that dared not cross the road because he had no guts. It was a terrible joke, the kind that makes you groan. But I laughed. It was a small, rusty sound. My laugh. But it was there. I watched her hands as she dealt the cards. I watched the way she checked the IV bag without breaking the flow of the conversation. I watched the way she adjusted the thermostat when she saw me shiver. Without me having to say a word, she was paying attention. She was gathering data on me, not to evaluate my worth, but to maximize my comfort. Around 4 a.m, the exhaustion finally won. My eyelids felt like they had weights attached to them. Marisol gathered the cards. "Sleep," she commanded gently. "You have a big day tomorrow." I panicked slightly. "Will you be here?" "I go off shift at 7 a.m, she said. "But I will be back tonight. I am on the night rotation for the next 4 weeks. You are stuck with me." "Kid." She stood by the bed. The room was quiet again, save for the rhythmic clicking of the pump, but the sound was different now. It didn't sound like a bomb counting down. It just sounded like a machine doing a job. Marisol reached out and placed her hand on the metal bed rail, right next to my hand. She did not pat me. She just held the rail, gripping it firmly, as if she were anchoring the bed to the floor, anchoring me to the earth. "Listen to me. Layla," she said. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "You just live. That is your only job. You breathe, you eat, you take the meds, you fight the bad cells. You do not worry about the money. You do not worry about the forms. You do not worry about the people who walked out that door." She squeezed the rail. "The rest," she said, and her eyes flashed with a fierce, protective light that I would never forget. "Let the grown-ups handle it." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving the door cracked open just enough so the light from the hallway formed a line on the floor, a line I could see, a line that meant I wasn't in the dark anymore. I closed my eyes. And for the first time since the diagnosis, I fell asleep. The woman who entered my hospital room the next morning did not look like someone who dealt in broken hearts. She looked like someone who dealt in logistics. Her name was Deirdre Lane. She was a caseworker from the Department of Social Services. She wore a charcoal gray suit that was sharp enough to cut paper, and she carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. She did not tiptoe around the room like the nurses. She pulled up a chair, placed the briefcase on her lap, and snapped the latches open with 2 distinct clicks that sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. I was sitting up in bed. The morning shift nurse had just changed my IV line, and my arm was throbbing. I felt small. I felt like a specimen in a jar that was about to be labeled and shelved. Deirdre Lane looked at me over the rim of her glasses. She had the kind of face that was not unkind, just incredibly tired. It was the face of a woman who had seen everything that could possibly go wrong in a family and had stopped being surprised by it 10 years ago. "Layla," she said. Her voice was crisp, lacking the soft edges of sympathy that Marisol had used the night before. I am here to explain your legal standing. Do you understand what happened yesterday? I nodded. My parents left. I said, "It is more specific than that," Deirdre corrected. She pulled a file out of her briefcase. It was thick. "Your parents signed a voluntary placement agreement," she said. She held up a document. I could see the signatures at the bottom. I knew my father's signature. It was a jagged, aggressive scrawl that he practiced so it would look authoritative on bank checks. There it was, right next to my mother's neat, looped handwriting. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they have temporarily transferred your physical custody to the state," Deirdre explained. She spoke slowly, making sure I understood every syllable. "They have claimed that they are unable to provide for your medical needs due to financial hardship and psychological distress. They have essentially yielded their rights to make decisions for you." I stared at the paper. Did they ask to say goodbye?" I asked. The question felt stupid as soon as it left my mouth. Deirdre did not lie to me. She did not try to soften the blow. "No," she said. "They signed the papers in the hospital administration office about 40 minutes after they left your room. They asked for a copy for their records. And then they left the premises." I felt a cold sensation wash over me. It was not sadness. It was shock. It was the shock of efficiency. It took them 40 minutes to divorce me. I had seen my father spend 3 weeks researching which lawnmower to buy. I had seen my mother spend days agonizing over the color of the napkins for Thanksgiving dinner. But giving up their daughter? That was a transaction they completed in under an hour. They did it with the same emotional detachment as canceling a cable subscription because the rates had gone up. Deirdre saw the look on my face. She closed the file and placed her hands on top of it. "Listen to me, Layla," she said, and for the first time, her voice dropped its bureaucratic armor. "I know this feels like the end of the world, but in my line of work, we call this a safety mechanism." "Safety?" I choked out. "I am an orphan. You are not an orphan," Deirdre said firmly. "You are a ward of the state, and right now, that is a better position to be in. Because the state has laws, the state has protocols, the state cannot walk out of the room because they do not like the price tag." She tapped the file with her index finger. "When you were with your parents, you were subject to their whims. Now, you are subject to a court order. That means you have a judge, a guardian ad litem, and me watching every move that happens in your life. The hospital cannot discharge you until I say so. The doctors cannot stop treating you until the protocol is finished. You have an army of paper protecting you now." She leaned forward. "We do not lose children. Layla, we might be overworked, and the system might be clumsy, but we do not let children evaporate. You are in the book now. You are on the record, and I am going to make sure you survive this." I looked at Deirdre Lane. I realized that she was offering me the only thing she had. She could not offer me love. She could not offer me a home, but she was offering me the unyielding, ironclad protection of bureaucracy. She was telling me that I was now a government project, and the government did not like to leave projects unfinished. "Thank you," I whispered. "We have a lot of work to do," she said, snapping the file shut. "Focus on the medicine. Let me handle the paperwork." The next 28 days were a blur of chemical warfare. Induction chemotherapy is not a treatment. It is an eviction notice to your own blood. The doctors hit me with everything they had: vincristine, corticosteroids, anthracyclines. I learned these names not because I wanted to be a doctor, but because I had to know the names of the things that were making my hair fall out in clumps on the pillow. I spent my 14th birthday vomiting into a plastic basin while a nurse rubbed my back. I spent Halloween watching the other kids on the ward get candy that I was not allowed to eat because my immune system was non-existent. But Marisol was there. She was there on the nights when the fever spiked to 103. She was there to change the sheets when I sweated through them. She was the one who shaved my head when the patches became too noticeable, turning it into a moment of punk rock rebellion rather than a tragedy. She brought a mirror and said, "Look at that bone structure. You look like a warrior." And slowly, miraculously, the numbers began to turn. My white blood cell count stabilized. The blasts in my marrow began to recede. The doctors started using words like remission and maintenance. On the 28th day, "Doctor," Thorne came in with a smile that actually reached his eyes. "You did it, Layla," he said. "The induction is complete. You are in remission." I felt a rush of relief so profound it made my knees weak. I was alive. I had beaten the thing my father said was a bad investment. But then, the reality of the victory settled in. If I was better, I did not need to be in the hospital. And if I did not need to be in the hospital, I had to go somewhere else. Deirdre Lane came back the next afternoon. She did not have the thick file this time. She had a thin folder. That terrified me more than the thick one. "We need to discuss discharge," Deirdre said. I sat on the edge of the bed, swinging my legs. My head was cold, covered by a knit beanie Marisol had given me. "Where do I go?" I asked. Deirdre sighed. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "This is the complicated part," she said. "Because of your medical needs. You cannot go to a group home. You are immunocompromised. You need a sterile environment. You need someone who can administer medications on a strict schedule and recognize signs of infection immediately." She opened the folder. "I have reached out to our network of specialized medical foster families. We have a few options. There is a family in the next county. The Millers. They have taken care of children with cystic fibrosis before. There is a lady in the city who is a retired nurse. I listened to her list the strangers who might be willing to take me. I felt the panic rising in my throat, hot and acidic. I imagined packing my things into a trash bag. I had seen that on TV. I imagined walking into a stranger's house, sleeping in a bed that wasn't mine, eating food that tasted wrong, trying to be polite, trying to be invisible so they wouldn't send me back. I imagined being moved again in 6 months because I was too much work, or because they got tired of driving me to clinic appointments. "I do not want to go," I said. My voice was shaking. "Layla, you cannot stay here," Deirdre said gently. "You are not sick enough for inpatient care anymore. Insurance won't cover it. I do not want to be a suitcase," I said. The words tumbled out. "I do not want to be passed around. I do not want to be something you just store somewhere until I turn 18. Deirdre looked pained. "I am trying to find you a permanent placement, Layla, but these things take time. We have to start with a temporary placement while we vet the long-term options." Temporary. That word sounded like a threat. I gripped the bed sheets. I felt like I was back in that exam room with my parents, being discussed as a logistical problem. Suddenly, the door opened. It was not a doctor. It was not a nurse in scrubs. It was Marisol, but she looked different. She was wearing jeans and a thick wool sweater. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders. She was holding a coffee cup from the outside world, and she had a purse over her shoulder. It was her day off. She stopped in the doorway, looking from my terrified face to Deirdre's exhausted one. She did not ask what was happening. She knew. She had been a nurse for 15 years. She knew exactly what happened on day 28. She walked into the room. She did not look at me. She looked at Deirdre. "Deirdre," Marisol said. Her voice was different today. It was not the voice of a subordinate nurse speaking to a state official. It was the voice of an equal. "Ms. Lane," Marisol corrected herself, stepping fully into the light. "You are looking for a medical placement for Layla." Deirdre looked up, surprised. "Yes, we are discussing the options." "Cut the options," Marisol said. She placed her coffee cup on the rolling table. "Check your database," Marisol said. "Look up Vega." "Marisol, I was certified for therapeutic foster care 4 years ago in this county. I kept my license active. My background check is current as of last month because of the hospital renewal." Deirdre blinked. She typed something into her tablet, her fingers moving quickly. Her eyebrows shot up. "You are in the system," Deirdre said, sounding surprised. "You are flagged as inactive, but eligible. I am active now," Marisol said. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked at Marisol. She was not looking at the tablet. She was looking at me. Marisol turned to Deirdre. "I have a 2-bedroom house. It is clean. No pets inside. I live 10 minutes from the hospital. I am an oncology-certified RN. I know her protocol better than anyone in this building. I know she needs her meds at 8 in the morning and 8 at night. I know she needs Zofran before she eats. Not after. She paused, taking a breath. And I know she likes her water with 3 ice cubes. Deirdre looked from the tablet to Marisol. This is highly irregular. Ms. Vega, usually, we do not place patients with hospital staff. There are boundary issues. There are no boundary issues. Marisol said firmly, there is a child who needs a safe place, and there is a qualified adult standing right in front of you offering that place. You can process the emergency placement paperwork today. You know you can. It is a kinship placement in spirit, if not in blood. Deirdre pursed her lips. She tapped her pen on the folder. She was a bureaucrat, yes, but she was a bureaucrat who wanted to close a case file successfully. She looked at me. Layla, Deirdre said, this is up to you. We can place you with the Millers, who are very experienced, or, she gestured to Marisol. I looked at Marisol. For the last month, I had seen her in scrubs. I had seen her professional face. I had seen her kindness. Yes, but I had always wondered if it was just part of the job. I wondered if she was nice to me because she was paid to be nice to dying children. But today, she was here on her day off. She was wearing her own clothes. She was risking her professional boundaries. She was standing between me and the system, offering up her home, her privacy, and her life. I looked into her eyes. I did not see pity. I did not see a woman looking for a charity case to make herself feel better. I saw the same look she had given me that first night. I saw a woman who looked at a broken thing and didn't see the cracks. She saw the structure underneath. I saw commitment. I do not want the Millers. I said, my voice was clear. I want Marisol. Marisol let out a breath she had been holding. Her shoulders relaxed. Deirdre looked at us both. A small, rare smile touched the corners of her mouth. Okay, Deirdre said. She pulled a new form out of her briefcase. I am going to override the standard matching protocol due to existing rapport and medical necessity. I can approve a provisional placement for 90 days, pending a home study. She looked at Marisol. You understand this changes everything, Deirdre warned. You are not her nurse anymore. You are the foster parent. The dynamic shifts. The reimbursement is a fraction of what you make in overtime. I do not care about the money. Marisol said, just give me the pen. Deirdre handed her the pen. Marisol leaned over the table. She signed the paper. Her signature was strong, loopless, and grounded. It looked nothing like my father's jagged scrawl. It looked like a promise. She capped the pen and looked at me. Pack your bag. Layla, Marisol said, we are going home. I looked at her, and the word home echoed in my head. It was a strange word. It used to mean a big house with cold parents. Now, it meant a small house with a nurse who knew how many ice cubes I needed. I slid off the bed. My legs were weak, but I stood up. I am ready, I said, and for the first time in 28 days, I walked toward the door without being afraid of what was on the other side. Marisol drove an old Honda Civic that smelled like vanilla and antiseptic. It was a 10-year-old car with a dent in the passenger door and an odometer that had rolled over more times than I could count. It was nothing like the pristine, leather-interior SUV my parents drove, the one where I was not allowed to eat or drink anything other than water. In Marisol's car, there were empty coffee cups in the holder and a stack of medical journals on the back seat. It was messy. It was real. We pulled into a driveway in a neighborhood that was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comes from expensive landscaping and security gates. It was the kind of quiet where people were at work. The houses were small bungalows, sitting close together, separated by chain-link fences and patches of grass that were more yellow than green. Marisol killed the engine. Welcome to the castle, she said, patting the dashboard. I grabbed my duffel bag. I felt strange standing on the sidewalk in regular clothes. For a month, I had been a patient. Now, standing here in jeans that felt a little loose around the waist, I did not know who I was. Inside, the house was warm. It was not decorated like a magazine. There were throw blankets draped over the couch that looked like they had been actually used. Not just placed there for aesthetics, there were stacks of mail on the counter. There was a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. "Come on," Marisol said, kicking off her shoes. "Let me show you your room." I followed her down a short hallway. I expected a guest room. I expected a room that looked like a storage space where someone had hastily shoved some boxes into a closet to make space for the foster kid. Marisol opened the door on the left. I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The walls were painted a soft, creamy yellow. It was the color of buttercups. I remembered a conversation from 2 weeks ago, at 3 a.m, when the nausea was bad and I was trying to distract myself. Marisol had asked me what my favorite color was. I had told her I hated the sterile white of the hospital and the cold beige of my parents' house. I told her I liked yellow because it looked like sunlight. I had said it once, in passing, between vomiting spells. She had remembered. There was a bed pushed against the wall with a quilt that looked hand-stitched. Beside the bed was a small bookshelf. I walked over to it. It was not empty. It was filled with paperback mysteries and fantasy novels, the exact genre I had told her I read to escape. There was a string of fairy lights draped over the headboard, giving the room a soft, magical glow that erased the harsh memory of fluorescent hospital tubes. I turned to look at her. I started, but my voice failed me. "You painted it. I had a couple of days off last week." Marisol shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "And I have a friend who works at a bookstore who gave me a discount on the paperbacks." She walked over and adjusted the curtain. "It is not much," she said, "but it is yours. No one comes in here unless you invite them. This is your space." I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave way beneath me, soft and welcoming. I looked at the yellow walls. I looked at the books. I looked at the woman who had spent her days off scraping and painting instead of sleeping, just so a girl she hardly knew would not have to wake up to white walls. The tears came then, but this was not the jagged, ripping grief I had felt in the hospital when my parents left. This was different. My shoulders dropped. The tension that had been holding my spine straight for a month suddenly evaporated. I curled forward, burying my face in my hands, and I sobbed. It was the cry of a soldier who finally puts down their pack after marching for 1,000 miles. It was the physical release of the realization that I did not have to fight to exist in this space. I was safe. Marisol did not say anything. She just walked over, sat beside me, and put a hand on my back. She let me cry until the tears ran out. And then she handed me a glass of water, 3 ice cubes. The next 6 months were a war. There is no cinematic way to describe the maintenance phase of chemotherapy. In movies, they show a montage of the character looking pale but beautiful, wearing a headscarf, looking out a window while sad music plays. The reality is much grosser. The reality is waking up at 2 a.m. because you have to throw up, but you are too weak to make it to the bathroom, so you use the bucket that is always next to the bed. The reality is the metallic taste in your mouth that makes even water taste like old pennies. The reality is watching your hair, which you thought you had made peace with losing, clump in the drain of the shower, leaving you looking like a frightened alien in the mirror. But Marisol was a general in this war. She did not treat me like a dying bird. She treated me like a job that needed to be done, but with a tenderness that softened the edges of the brutality. She created a system. On the refrigerator, she taped a giant laminated calendar. It was color-coded: red for clinic days, blue for high-dose meds, green for good days. She turned the living room into what we called the base. On the days when the fatigue was so heavy I could not lift my head, she would drag my mattress out into the living room and build a fort around it with pillows and blankets. She would set up a tray with everything I needed: the remote, a bell to ring if I needed her, and a cooler with ginger ale. She learned my stomach better than I did. She realized that on the days after methotrexate, I could not handle solid food. So she learned to make these nutrient-dense smoothies that tasted like chocolate, but were packed with spinach and protein powder. She learned that the smell of frying onions made me gag. So she stopped cooking with onions entirely for 5 months. She became my pharmacist. I would watch her at the kitchen table every Sunday night, sorting pills into little plastic organizers. She would double-check the dosages, cross-referencing them with the doctor's orders, her face scrunched up in concentration. "We are not missing a single dose," she would say. "We are going to kill these bad cells with precision." I could not go to regular school. My immune system was basically a screen door trying to hold back a hurricane. So, I did school at the kitchen table. Marisol, who had not done algebra in 20 years, sat with me. She bought a used textbook and relearned quadratic equations just so she could check my work. "I do not get this," I groaned one afternoon, pushing the paper away. "X makes no sense." Marisol looked up from the stove where she was boiling pasta. "X is just a variable." "Layla," she said, waving a wooden spoon, "X is like the cancer. We do not know what it is doing exactly, but we can solve around it to isolate it. Isolate the variable." I laughed. "You are turning math into oncology. Whatever works." She grinned. But as the months wore on, as the snow melted and the spring rains came, I started to notice things. I was recovering. My brain was clearing, and the fog of sickness was lifting enough for me to see the edges of the picture. I noticed that the house was often dim. Marisol would only turn on the lamp right next to where we were sitting. She would say it was for ambiance, but I saw her eyeing the electric meter on the side of the house when she thought I wasn't looking. I noticed that the thermostat was always set to 65 degrees. I had plenty of blankets. Marisol had bought me a heated throw that she insisted I use, but I saw her wearing 2 sweaters and thick wool socks while she walked around the house. I noticed that the food in the fridge changed. My shelf was full of organic yogurt, fresh fruit, and the expensive protein powder. Her shelf had generic bread, peanut butter, and ramen noodles. And then there were the shifts. Marisol was supposed to be working 3 12-hour shifts a week. That was a full-time schedule. But I would hear her on the phone in the hallway, her voice low. "Yes, I can take the Saturday night shift," she would say. "Yes, put me down for the double on Sunday." "No, it is fine. I do not need the rest." She would come home at 8 in the morning, her eyes red-rimmed, her skin gray with exhaustion. She would make me breakfast, always fresh, always hot, and then she would collapse onto the couch for a 3-hour nap before getting up to help me with my schoolwork. One night in April, I woke up around 3 in the morning. I was thirsty. I crept out of my room, tiptoeing down the hallway to the kitchen. The light over the stove was on. Marisol was sitting at the small round kitchen table. She had her head in her hands. Spread out in front of her was a spiral-bound notebook and a pile of receipts. There was a calculator next to her elbow. She had fallen asleep sitting up. I stepped closer, my bare feet silent on the linoleum. I looked over her shoulder. The notebook was a ledger. I saw columns of numbers written in her neat, loopless handwriting. Rent, car insurance, electric, copay for Layla's meds, special dietary food. At the bottom of the page, the number was circled in red ink. It was a negative number. I looked at the receipts. She was juggling bills. She was paying $50 on the credit card to keep it open so she could buy my medication. She was deferring the car payment to pay the heating bill. I felt a lump in my throat that was harder and heavier than any tumor. My biological father, Glenn, had a portfolio worth millions. He had refused to pay for my treatment because he wanted to preserve his capital. Marisol had nothing. She was a nurse living paycheck to paycheck, and she was literally bankrupting herself to keep me warm, fed, and alive. She was burning her own life as fuel to keep mine going. She shifted in her sleep, letting out a small, tired sigh. I wanted to wake her up and tell her I could eat ramen. I wanted to tell her to turn the heat down to 50, but I knew she would not let me. She was protecting me from the poverty just as fiercely as she was protecting me from the disease. I backed away silently. I went back to my room and stared at the ceiling, vowing that one day I would fill this woman's house with so much light she would never have to sit in the dark again. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening, we were in the living room. I was feeling better. My hair was starting to grow back, a soft fuzz that felt like velvet. We were watching a terrible reality show about people baking cakes that looked like shoes. I was sitting on the floor, folding laundry, my chore, which I insisted on doing because I needed to contribute something. Marisol was on the couch, sewing a button onto her work uniform. The air was comfortable, easy. The smell of the roasted chicken we had eaten for dinner still lingered. Marisol, did you see the remote? I asked, digging under a pile of towels. It is on the armrest, she mumbled, biting a thread. I reached up and grabbed it. I paused, looking at the screen. Hey, Mom, can you pass me the scissors? I need to cut this tag off. The words left my mouth before I processed them. They floated into the room, simple and destructive. Mom. I froze. My hand hovered over the remote. The silence that followed was absolute. The TV was still blaring, but the sound seemed to drop away. I did not move. I did not breathe. I was terrified I had overstepped. I was terrified she would correct me. I was terrified she would remind me that she was just my foster placement, that this was temporary, that I shouldn't get too attached. I slowly turned my head to look at her. Marisol had stopped sewing. The needle was suspended in midair. She was looking at me. Her expression was unreadable for a second. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the flickering light of the television. Then, her shoulders softened. A look of such profound, quiet acceptance washed over her face that it made my heart ache. She did not smile big. She did not make a scene. She just looked at me like I belonged there, like I had always belonged there. She reached over to the side table and picked up the scissors. Here you go, she said, her voice steady, but softer than usual. She handed them to me, handle first. Thanks, I whispered. You are welcome, she said. She went back to sewing the button. I went back to folding the towels. We did not talk about it. We did not need to. But in that moment, the word hung in the air between us, shimmering and solid. It was no longer a biological descriptor. It was a title, and she had earned it. The 90-day mark in the foster care system is a terrifying thing. It hangs over your head like a guillotine blade that is slowly losing tension. It is the expiration date on the temporary label. For 3 months, I had lived in the yellow room. I had eaten Marisol's cooking. I had learned to breathe without the crushing weight of my biological parents' expectations. But in the back of my mind, there was always the ticking clock. I knew how the system worked. Deirdre Lane had explained it. Temporary placement meant exactly that. The goal was usually reunification, or finding a permanent placement, which often meant a different house, a different family, a restart. I woke up every morning wondering if today was the day Deirdre would call and say, "Pack your bags. Layla, we found a family in the suburbs who wants a teenager." One Tuesday night in late May, the air in the kitchen felt heavy. The humidity of the coming summer was pressing against the screen door. We had just finished dinner, tacos, because it was Tuesday. And Marisol respected the sanctity of Taco Tuesday with a religious fervor. I was clearing the plates. Marisol was sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She was not looking at her phone. She was not looking at the bills. She was looking at me. "Layla." "Sit down," she said. My stomach dropped. The plate in my hand rattled against the counter. This was it. This was the talk. She was going to tell me that she was tired. She was going to tell me that the double shifts were too much, that a single woman in her 30s didn't need the anchor of a sick teenager dragging her down. I sat down opposite her. I kept my hands in my lap so she wouldn't see them shaking. "What is wrong?" I asked. "Did I forget to take the trash out?" "No," Marisol said. She reached across the table. She did not take my hand. She just placed her palm flat on the wood. "An open invitation. My certification for this placement expires in 2 weeks, she said. I nodded. "I know. I have my bag ready." Marisol frowned. Her eyebrows pulled together in that sharp V that appeared whenever she was reading a difficult EKG strip. "Why do you have your bag ready?" she asked. "In case I have to go," I said. "I washed all my clothes yesterday." Marisol let out a sigh that sounded like a tire deflating. She looked at the ceiling for a second. Composing herself, and then looked back at me with an intensity that pinned me to the chair. "You are not going anywhere," she said, "unless you want to." I blinked. "What?" "I do not want to renew the foster contract." "Layla," she said. Her voice was steady, void of any hesitation. "I am done with the caseworkers coming in here every month to check if I have enough milk in the fridge. I am done with asking the state for permission to take you to the movies." She leaned forward. "I do not want you to be a foster kid anymore. I want to adopt you. I want this to be permanent. I want to be your mother, on paper, in court, and in every way that matters, forever." The world stopped spinning. I looked at her face. I looked for the trap. I had been trained by Glenn and Kara Hartwell to look for the fine print. I had been trained to believe that every act of kindness came with a bill of sale attached. But why? I asked. The question felt small and pathetic. But I had to ask it. "Why what?" Marisol asked. "Why would you want that?" I asked. "I am expensive. I have appointments. I might get sick again. I am a lot of work. Am I not interrupting your life? You could travel. You could date. You could do anything if you didn't have me." I felt the tears hot in my eyes. Am I not just in the way? Marisol reached across the gap and grabbed my hands. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. She needed me to feel this. "Layla, look at me." I looked up. "You are not interrupting my life," she said fiercely. "You are my life." She squeezed my hands. "Before you came here, I came home to a quiet house. I ate dinner standing up over the sink. I worked until I dropped because I didn't have a reason to come home. You filled this house. You gave me a reason to paint the walls yellow. You are not a burden. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." I broke. I slid out of the chair and fell to my knees on the linoleum floor, burying my face in her lap. She wrapped her arms around me, rocking me back and forth as I cried. It was the first time I allowed myself to believe that forever wasn't just a word fairy tales use to lie to children. The process of becoming a family is strangely clinical. You would think it involves magic and music, but mostly, it involves background checks, fingerprints, and endless stacks of paper. Deirdre Lane was thrilled. When Marisol told her, Deirdre actually smiled, a real smile that showed teeth. She fast-tracked the paperwork. She scheduled the home study. She waived the waiting period. But in the middle of the joy, there was a moment of cold, hard reality. We were sitting in Deirdre's office, reviewing the final petition for adoption. Deirdre was going through the checklist. Termination of parental rights. Deirdre said, checking a box. Completed. I looked at the file. Did they fight it? I asked. I had always wondered. In the back of my mind, I had a fantasy that Glenn and Kara had fought for me. Maybe they had hired lawyers. Maybe they had argued that they made a mistake. Maybe they wanted me back, and the state had just said no. Deirdre stopped writing. She looked at Marisol, then at me. "Layla," she said gently, "I need to know." I said, "Did they fight to keep me?" Deirdre pulled a document from the bottom of the stack. It was the original surrender paperwork. "They did not fight it," Deirdre said softly. "In fact, their lawyer expedited it." She slid the paper across the desk. "They signed a voluntary termination of rights with prejudice," Deirdre explained. "Do you know what that means?" I shook my head. "It means they gave up their rights permanently, without the state having to prove them unfit in a trial." Deirdre said, "But it was not just about custody. Their lawyer included a clause here, Clause 4B. She pointed to a paragraph of dense legal text. "It releases them from any current and future financial liability regarding your medical debts." She said, "By terminating their rights fully and immediately, they ensured that the hospital and the state could not go after their assets for your leukemia treatment." I stared at the paper. It was a financial strategy. They didn't just abandon me because they didn't love me. They abandoned me to protect their credit score. They abandoned me to save their portfolio. It was calculated. It was cold. It was the ultimate rejection. They had looked at their daughter and seen a liability, and they had liquidated the asset to stop the bleeding. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It was heavy and hard, like a stone. But strangely, It did not make me sad. It made me free. If they could cut me out like a tumor, then I could cut them out like a scar. I picked up the pen. Where do I sign? I asked Deirdre. She pointed to the line. I signed my name, and with that ink, I severed the last thread connecting me to the Hartwells. The adoption hearing took place on a bright morning in August. The courthouse smelled of floor wax and old wood. We stood before a judge, a woman with gray hair and a kind face who looked over her glasses at us. Marisol was wearing a dress, a real dress, blue and flowery. I was wearing a white blouse and the nicest pants I owned. The judge asked the standard questions. Do you understand the commitment? Do you agree to this freely? Then, she looked at me. Layla. The judge said, as part of this adoption, you have the right to change your name. You can keep your birth name, or you can take your mother's name. What is your choice? I looked at Marisol. She was holding her breath. She had told me I didn't have to change it. She said she respected my identity, but my identity wasn't Hartwell. Hartwell was the name on the insurance policy that had been denied. Hartwell was the name of the people who had left me. I looked at the judge. I want to be a Rios, I said clearly. The judge smiled. Very well, she said. She raised her gavel. From this day forward, you are legally Layla Rios. The gavel came down. Bang. It was such a simple sound. Just wood hitting wood, but it sounded like a lock clicking shut on a vault. I was safe. I was a Rios. We walked out of the courthouse into the blinding summer sun. Marisol turned to me in the parking lot. I have something for you, she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside lay a silver necklace. The pendant was delicate. 2 letters interlaced in a flowing script. L and M, Layla and Marisol. Woven together so tightly you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I looked up at her, my throat tight. So you remember, Marisol said, her voice thick with emotion. You do not disappear anymore. You are tethered to me. Wherever you go, whatever you do, you are connected. You are real. I fastened the clasp around my neck. The silver felt cool against my skin. I touched the letters. I promise, I whispered. The healing did not end with the gavel. In fact, that was when the real work began. Marisol was a nurse, and she knew that trauma lived in the body just as much as cancer did. She sat me down one evening a week after the adoption. We fixed the blood, she said. Now we have to fix the heart. She didn't mean cardiology. She meant therapy. I resisted at first. I didn't want to talk to a stranger about Glenn and Kara. I wanted to forget them. You cannot forget them. Marisol said, you have to process them. If you bury it, it rots, and I'm not going to let you rot. So, I went to see Dr. Evans, a therapist with an office that smelled like lavender and old books. For the first 3 sessions, I sat in silence. I didn't know what to say. Dr. Evans didn't push. She just waited. Eventually, it came out. The anger, the shame, the deep, gnawing feeling that I was defective. Why didn't they want me? I asked one day, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Was I not good enough? Was I too average? Doctor. Evans looked at me. Layla, she said, their inability to see your value is a reflection of their blindness. Not your worth. You are not a product on a shelf. You are a person. It took months. It took screaming into pillows. It took writing letters to Glenn and Kara that I would never send. And then burning them in the backyard while Marisol stood by with a fire extinguisher, just in case. But slowly, the voice in my head changed. The voice that sounded like Glenn, the one that said average, expensive, liability, began to fade, and a new voice replaced it. A voice that sounded like Marisol, worthy, fighter, daughter, and then there was school. I had missed almost an entire year. I was behind in everything. The guidance counselor at the local high school suggested I repeat the 8th grade. I looked at the counselor, then I looked at Marisol. No, I said, I am not repeating. I told them, I will do summer school. I will take night classes. I will do double the work. but I am not staying behind. Marisol backed me up. She bought me flashcards. She quizzed me on history while she cooked dinner. She listened to me recite biology terms while she drove me to checkups. I studied with a vengeance. I attacked my textbooks the way the chemotherapy had attacked the cancer. I wasn't just trying to pass. I was trying to excel. At first, I told myself I was doing it to prove them wrong. I wanted to get straight A's so that one day, Glenn Hartwell would see my name in a newspaper and realize he had bet against a winner. But one night, late, when I was grinding through a chemistry chapter, Marisol came in with a plate of sliced apples. She watched me for a moment. "Layla," she said. "Yeah?" I didn't look up. "Who are you doing this for?" she asked. "For them," I said automatically. "To show them." Marisol put the plate down on my desk. She placed her hand over my textbook, stopping me from reading. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't give them that power. If you succeed to spite them, they still own your success. They are still the center of your universe." She lifted my chin so I had to look at her. "Do this for you, Layla. Do this because you are smart. Do this because you survived. Do this because you have a future that belongs only to you." I looked at her. I looked at the yellow walls. I touched the silver necklace at my throat. She was right. Every time I thought of Glenn, I was giving him rent-free space in my head. He didn't pay for my chemo. Why should I let him live in my mind? I closed the book. I took a breath. Then I opened it again. "Okay," I said, "for me." And that was the turning point. I didn't just catch up. I flew. I went from the girl who was average to the girl who was unstoppable. Not because I wanted their applause, but because I wanted to see how high I could fly on my own wings. I was Layla Rios, and I was just getting started. High school graduation was not the cinematic climax of my life. It was a checkpoint. It was the moment I traded a diploma for a starting pistol. I stood on the football field of the local public high school, wearing a polyester gown that was 2 inches too short because I had hit a growth spurt in my senior year. Marisol was in the bleachers. She was not hard to find. She was the one screaming the loudest, waving a homemade sign that said, "Future Doctor," Rios in glitter glue. I had finished in the top 5% of my class. That was not an accident. It was a calculated campaign of academic warfare. For 3 years, I had treated textbooks like enemies that needed to be subdued. I took every advanced placement class the school offered. I spent my lunch breaks in the library and my Friday nights doing practice calculus problems, but I did not do it alone. Calculus was my Achilles heel. In my junior year, when integrals started looking like alien hieroglyphics, I began to panic. I saw my GPA slipping, and with it, my chances of a scholarship. I tried to hide it, but Marisol knew. She always knew. She came home one evening with a flyer for a private tutor, a retired engineer named Mr. Henderson, who charged $50 an hour. I told her we could not afford it. I told her I would just study harder. Marisol had looked at me with that stubborn set of her jaw and said, "Education is not a luxury, Layla. It is equipment. You do not go climbing a mountain without a rope." She picked up 3 extra shifts a month at the urgent care clinic to pay for Mr. Henderson. Every time I sat at the kitchen table with him, cracking the code of derivatives, I knew that this knowledge was being bought with Marisol's sleep. I made sure I did not waste a single penny of it. I aced the exam. When I held that high school diploma, I knew exactly where I was going. I wanted to be a doctor, but I did not want to be the kind of doctor who stood at the foot of the bed, read a chart, and walked away. I did not want to be Dr. Aris Thorne, who was kind but distant. I wanted to be the person who touched the patient's hand. I wanted to be the person who noticed the ice cubes were melting. I wanted to be Marisol first. I chose a specific path. I would get my Bachelor of Science in nursing first, become an RN, and then bridge to medical school. I wanted to know what it felt like to change a bedpan and start an IV before I ever learned how to perform surgery. I wanted to understand the hierarchy of the hospital from the bottom up so that when I got to the top, I would never look down on anyone. I applied to Northbridge College. It was a private liberal arts college with one of the best pre-med nursing programs in the state. It was competitive, it was prestigious, and it was expensive. When the acceptance letter came, Marisol cried. When the financial aid package came, she went quiet. I had won a merit scholarship that covered about 60% of the tuition. It was a huge sum, but the remaining 40%, plus room and board, was a number that looked like a mountain. I can go to the state school, I said, looking at the tuition bill. It is cheaper. Marisol shook her head. Northbridge has the clinical rotation at St. Jude's affiliate. That is where you want to be. But the money, I started. We will figure it out, Marisol said. She pulled out a calculator. We take the student loans for the tuition. I will cover the housing and the books. Mom, that is thousands of dollars. I argued. I have been saving. She lied. I knew she hadn't. I knew she had just finished paying off her own car. I will pick up some agency work on the weekends, she said, cutting off my protest. The agency pays double time. Look, Layla, you do the studying. I will do the funding. We are a team. You get the grades. I get the cash. That is the deal. So I went to Northbridge. I worked as hard as I had in high school. But with a new intensity, I worked in the campus library to pay for my own food. I didn't go to parties. I didn't join a sorority. I spent my time in the anatomy lab and the simulation center. I was a ghost who haunted the science building. By my sophomore year, I was on the dean's list. I was 20 years old. I felt like I was finally outrunning the shadow of my childhood. I was building a credit history, or so I thought. I had a small student checking account, and I paid my library fines on time. Then came the apartment application, for my junior year. I wanted to move off campus to save money. A friend and I found a cheap 2-bedroom apartment near the hospital, where we would be doing our clinicals. The landlord was a grumpy old man who required a credit check for all tenants. I filled out the form with confidence. I had never borrowed money other than my student loans, which were in deferment. I had no credit card debt. I was a ghost, financially speaking, but a clean ghost. 3 days later, the landlord called me. I cannot rent to you, Ms. Rios. He grunted. Why? I asked, confused. Is it my income? My mother is co-signing. It is not the income, he said. It is the delinquency. I do not rent to people with charged-off credit card debt. It shows a lack of character. He hung up. I stood in the middle of my dorm room, holding my phone, feeling the blood drain from my face. Delinquency. Charged-off debt. I didn't understand. I immediately went to my laptop and navigated to a credit reporting site. I typed in my social security number, my birth date, and my new legal name. The report loaded. A red bar flashed across the top of the screen. Poor credit. My score was 540. I scrolled down, my hands trembling. There, under the negative accounts section, was a credit card. It was a store credit card for a high-end electronics retailer. The account had been opened 7 years ago. I did the math in my head. 7 years ago, I was 13 years old. I was in the hospital, hooked up to chemotherapy drugs, fighting for my life. The account had a balance of $3,000. It had been maxed out and then never paid. It had gone to collections, and then it had been charged off as bad debt 2 years ago. I stared at the screen. Identity theft. Someone had stolen my social security number when I was a child. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. This was it. This was the thing that would ruin me. I couldn't get an apartment. I probably couldn't get more student loans. If the hospital did a background check for my medical license later, this would show up. I was 20 years old, and I was already financially ruined by a stranger. I called Marisol. I was hyperventilating. Mom, someone stole my identity. I gasped. I have debt. Thousands of dollars of debt from when I was 13. Marisol did not gasp. She did not scream. There was a pause on the line. And then her voice came through, steady and calm. The voice of the nurse who had talked me through 1,000 needle sticks. Layla, breathe. She commanded. I can't. I choked. My life is over. The landlord rejected me. Your life is not over, Marisol said. It is a data error. or it is a crime. Either way, it is fixable. She paused. Come home this weekend, she said. Bring the report. We do not panic. We handle this with paperwork, not with emotion. That is the rule. I went home. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had taught me algebra, the same table where she had told me she wanted to adopt me. Marisol had her reading glasses on. She went through the credit report line by line. We need to dispute this, she said. We need to file a police report for identity theft. And then we need to send that report to the credit bureaus. She looked at me. We need to know who did this, she said, if it was a stranger. It is just bad luck, but we need to check the details. She pointed to the account details tab on the screen. Click that, she said. Let us see where the card was registered. I clicked the tab. The screen expanded. It showed the billing address associated with the card when it was opened. I read the address, 4200 Oakwood Drive. The world stopped. The air left the room. I knew that address. I knew the way the sunlight hit the front door in the morning. I knew the code to the garage door opener. I knew the smell of the cedar closet in the master bedroom. It was the house I grew up in. It was Glenn and Kara Hartwell's house. I felt a physical blow to my gut. Harder than any punch. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a hacker in a basement in a foreign country. It was them. They had opened a credit card in my name. They had used my social security number and the date. I looked at the date opened again. October 25th, 2 days after the diagnosis, 2 days after they walked out of the hospital, while I was lying in that hospital bed, terrified and alone, crying for my mother. They were not just abandoning me, they were using me. They had realized that even though they were giving me up, my credit history was a blank slate. They had decided to wring one last bit of value out of the asset before they discarded it completely. They had bought electronics, $3,000 worth of electronics, probably a new laptop for Brianna, probably a new TV for the living room where I no longer sat. They had bought comfort for themselves with the future of the daughter they had left to die. I looked up at Marisol. Her face had gone pale. She recognized the address, too, from the old files. Oh, God, she whispered. She reached out to touch my hand. But I pulled back. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. I wasn't sad. Sadness is for when you lose something you love. I was furious, but it was a cold, glacial fury. It was the kind of rage that burns so hot it feels like ice. This wasn't just abandonment. Abandonment is passive. This was active. This was theft. This was a deliberate sabotage of my future. They had tried to ensure that even if I survived the cancer, I would never survive the world. They wanted me to fail. They wanted me to be the bad investment they claimed I was. Layla? Marisol asked softly. I turned around. My face felt stiff. They bought a TV, I said. My voice sounded strange, mechanical. They left me in a cancer ward, and then they went to a store and used my name to buy a TV. Marisol stood up. She looked ready to drive over there and burn their house down. I saw the fire in her eyes, the protective lioness rage that I loved so much. We are going to the police, Marisol said. We are going to have them arrested. No, I said. Marisol stopped. What? No police yet. I said, if we go to the police now, it is just a report. They might claim it was a mistake. They might claim I gave them permission. They have expensive lawyers. They will bury us in legal motions until I run out of money. I walked back to the table and looked at the screen. I want to be sure. I said, I want it to be undeniable. I need a lawyer. I said, not a police officer. I need someone who knows how to trace the paper trail. Marisol nodded slowly. She understood. I know a place, she said. There is a legal aid clinic downtown. They help low-income families with credit disputes. My friend works there. We went the next morning. The legal aid office was in a basement of a community center. It was cluttered and smelled of old coffee. The advisor was a young law student named Sarah, who looked about my age. She listened to the story. She looked at the credit report. She looked at the address. This is fraud, Sarah said bluntly. It is familial identity theft. It is actually very common. Unfortunately, but usually, it is parents paying the electric bill. This is luxury goods. She looked at me. If you pursue this, Sarah warned, it is going to get ugly. To get this off your credit report, you have to file an identity theft affidavit. That affidavit is a legal statement that you did not open the account. Once you file that, the credit card company will launch an investigation. They will look at the signature on the application. Sarah paused. If the signature belongs to your parents, the credit card company will go after them. They will press charges for bank fraud. It is a federal crime. I looked at Sarah. Good. I said, Sarah handed me a stack of forms. Do you want to send a demand letter to them first? She asked. Sometimes, if you threaten legal action, they will pay it off. I thought about it. I thought about sending a letter to Glenn Hartwell. I thought about him opening it, sneering, and writing a check to make the problem go away. He would think he had won. He would think he could buy his way out of his crimes just like he tried to buy his way out of raising me. No, I said, I do not want their money. I want the record. I took the pen. I want to file the affidavit. I said, I want the investigation. I want the credit card company to pull the original application and find Glenn Hartwell's signature on a document that claims he is Layla Rios. I looked at Marisol. I want the truth to have a signature. I told her. I filled out the forms. I didn't rush. I wrote my name. My new name. Layla Rios. At the bottom of the page. We walked out of the office. The sun was shining. But the world looked different to me now. The city wasn't just buildings and streets. It was a grid of data, of records, of paper trails. Marisol put her arm around my shoulder. Are you okay? She asked. I touched the silver necklace at my throat. I am done being sad. Mom, I said. I looked toward the wealthy hills where Oakwood Drive sat. They think I am dead, I said softly. Or they think I am a failure. They think I am a ghost that vanished into the foster system. I tightened my grip on the strap of my bag. They have no idea that they just handed me the weapon I'm going to use to destroy them. I decided then. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. I would let the credit card company do the work. I would let the investigation run its course. I would let the debt sit there, a ticking time bomb in their financial history, waiting for the right moment to explode. I would finish college. I would go to medical school. I would become the most successful, powerful version of myself. And when I finally stood in front of them again, I wouldn't be a 13-year-old girl begging for her life. I would be the prosecutor of their sins. I smiled at Marisol. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. Let's go get some ice cream, I said. I have a lot of studying to do. Harbor State School of Medicine was not a place for the faint of heart. It was a concrete labyrinth of fluorescent lights, sleepless nights, and the smell of formaldehyde that seemed to cling to your skin no matter how many times you showered. It was a grinder designed to break you down and rebuild you as a clinician. I loved every second of it, while my classmates complained about the 40-hour shifts and the impossible volume of memorization. I thrived. I had an advantage they did not. I had already lived in a hospital. I knew the rhythm of the ward not from a textbook, but from the marrow of my bones. When I walked into the pediatric oncology wing for my third-year rotations, I did not see cases. I saw children who were terrified that the beeping machines were going to eat them. I became known as the student who lingered. The attending physicians would do their rounds, barking orders and checking charts, but I would stay behind for 30 seconds. I would check the temperature of the water pitcher. I would ask the kid if they wanted the red blanket or the blue one. I would look the parents in the eye, really look at them, and decode the terror behind their polite nods. I was looking for myself in those beds, and, if I am being honest, I was looking for Glenn and Kara in the parents. I wanted to see if abandonment was a common symptom of the disease. It was not. I saw parents sleeping in chairs for weeks, parents who wore the same clothes for days because they refused to leave the bedside, parents who would have sold their own organs to buy their child another hour of life. It validated me. It proved that what happened to me was not a natural reaction to stress. It was a choice. Marisol was there for every step of the climb. She was there at the white coat ceremony, sitting in the front row, cheering louder than the parents of the legacy students who had doctors in their family going back 3 generations. She was there when I failed my first biochemistry exam and came home sobbing that I was an imposter. She made tea, sat me down, and said, "Failure is data, Layla. It tells you what you do not know yet. Go back and learn it." She was there on the nights I came home from the hospital smelling like vomit and death, unable to speak because I had lost a patient. She did not tell me it would get easier. She just held me and let me stain her shoulder with my grief. By the time my 4th year ended, I was not just surviving, I was dominating. The realization that I was going to be a doctor was no longer a dream. It was a logistical inevitability. Then came the email from the dean's office. Subject: Valedictorian Selection and Commencement Logistics. I opened it on my phone while standing in line for coffee in the hospital cafeteria. The words blurred for a second. Highest academic standing. Unanimous selection by the faculty. Honor of delivering the commencement address. I was valedictorian. The girl who was average, the girl who was a bad investment, was graduating at the top of her class. I called Marisol immediately. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. We celebrated that night with takeout sushi and a bottle of sparkling apple cider. But the joy was short-lived. 3 days later, I received a follow-up email from the graduation committee. Dear Dr. Rios, as valedictorian, you are entitled to a private box for your family and guests. In addition to the standard ticket allocation, we have received a request from 2 individuals claiming to be your biological parents, Mr. Glenn Hartwell and Mrs. Kara Hartwell. They have contacted the alumni office stating they wish to attend. Since you are the speaker, we wanted to verify if you wish to allocate seats for them in your box, or if you would prefer we deny the request. I sat at my desk in my small apartment. The screen of my laptop glowed white in the dim room. Glenn Hartwell, Kara Hartwell. Seeing their names typed out like that, so official, so mundane, felt like a physical blow. It was as if the last 10 years had evaporated. I was 13 again, swinging my legs on the exam table, listening to my father haggle over the price of my life. They wanted to come. The audacity of it took my breath away. They had not called. They had not written. They had not paid a single dime of the tuition. They had ignored the debt collection notices for the credit card fraud I had pinned on them years ago, probably settling it quietly to avoid a scandal. But now that I was a success, now that I was going to be Dr. Rios, valedictorian, now they wanted a front row seat. They wanted to bask in the reflected glow of the trophy they had thrown in the trash. I stared at the blinking cursor. My hands were shaking. I wanted to type no. I wanted to type call security if they step foot on campus. Marisol walked into the room. She had a basket of laundry in her hip. She saw my face and dropped the basket immediately. Layla? What is it? I turned the laptop toward her. She read the email. Her expression hardened. The vein in her neck, the one that popped out when she was truly angry, began to throb. "I will handle this," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I will drive to the administration building right now. They will not get within a mile of you." She reached for her keys. "Wait," I said. Marisol stopped. "Layla, you do not have to do this. You owe them nothing. They are vultures." "I know," I said. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city skyline. I thought about the speech I had to write. I thought about the story I wanted to tell. If I ban them, I said slowly, they become victims in their own minds. They will tell their friends at the country club that their ungrateful daughter shut them out. They will spin a story about how they tried to reach out. But I was too cold, too distant. I turned back to Marisol. Marisol asked the question that cut through the noise. "What do you want them to see?" she asked. I looked at my mother, my real mother. I looked at the woman who had sold her free time, her sleep, and her comfort to get me here. "I want them to see you," I said. "I want them to see you sitting in the front row, wearing the badge of mother. And I want them to see me. not the sick child, not the victim. I want them to see the doctor. I want them to see exactly what they threw away. I sat back down at the computer. Let them come, I said. I typed the reply. Please allocate 2 seats for Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell in the general VIP section. Do not place them in the family box. The family box is reserved for Marisol Vega. I hit send. The tension in the room broke, but it was replaced by a different kind of energy. It was the energy of a storm gathering, but the universe was not done with me yet. 2 days before the ceremony, I went to my mailbox. Amidst the graduation cards and the flyers for medical residency insurance, there was a thin gray envelope. It looked official. The return address was Apex Asset Recovery Services. I frowned. I had been meticulous with my finances. My student loans were in order. I paid my credit card in full every month. I tore it open. Dear Ms. Rios, we are attempting to collect a debt of $4,250 regarding an unpaid utility account with Southern Energy Solutions. The account was opened on June 14, 2011. I froze. June 14, 2011. I did the mental math instantly. I was 14 years old on that date. I was living in Marisol's guest room. I was bald. I was undergoing maintenance chemotherapy. I did not have an apartment. I did not have a utility bill. I looked at the service address listed on the collection letter, 4200 Oakwood Drive. Again, they had done it again. It wasn't just the credit card for the electronics when I was 13, a year later, when I was safe in foster care. When they had already signed away their rights, they had used my social security number again to put the electricity bill for their large, expensive house in my name. They had kept the lights on in their home by ruining the credit of the daughter they had discarded. I dropped the letter on the counter. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity settle over my brain. This was not just negligence. This was predation. They were eating their young. I needed ammunition. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years, but had never deleted. Deirdre? I asked when the voice answered. Layla? Deirdre Lane's voice was surprised. She didn't work in foster care anymore. She was a director at a regional nonprofit now. Is everything okay? I need a favor. I said, a big one. I told her about the graduation. I told her about the parents coming. And then I told her about the letter from Apex Asset Recovery. I heard Deirdre draw a sharp breath on the other end of the line. That is criminal, she whispered. That is identity theft involving a minor. Again, I know. I said, but Deirdre, I need more than just the debt record. I need to know about the day they left. I explained what I was looking for. I needed the hospital social work notes, not the medical charts, but the administrative notes. The ones that detailed the interaction between the staff and the parents. Deirdre hesitated. Layla, those records are archived. And technically, Deirdre, I interrupted. You told me once that you never lose a child. Well, I need you to find me now. I need to know exactly what was said in that room. I need the smoking gun. Give me 2 hours, Deirdre said. 2 hours later, my email pinged. It was a PDF file. Scanned images of old, yellowed paper. I scrolled past the intake forms. I scrolled past the insurance denials. And then I found it. It was a handwritten note, scribbled in the margins of the Discharge Against Medical Advice warning form. It was signed by the hospital social worker on duty that day, a woman named Sarah Jenkins. The note was dated October 23rd, 15 years ago. Subject, interaction with father, Glenn Hartwell. Time, 14:30. Notes, father refused to sign payment guarantee for induction chemotherapy. Stated specifically, I am not throwing good money after bad. The girl is average. We need to preserve the college fund for the older sibling who has actual potential. This is a business decision. Mother, Kara Hartwell, concurred, stating, we cannot let a sickness bankrupt our reputation. Parents were informed that leaving would result in CPS notification. Father replied, call them. Let the state pay for it. That is what taxes are for. I stared at the screen. There it was. It wasn't just my memory. It wasn't just the trauma distorting the past. He had actually said it. This is a business decision. He had called his dying daughter a bad business decision, and he had explicitly planned to dump the cost on the state while keeping his own money for my sister. This piece of paper was nuclear. If this got out, if this was sent to his partners at the firm, if this was published in the local paper, he would be ruined. He would be a pariah. I printed the page. The printer hummed and whirred, spitting out the warm sheet of paper. I held it in my hand. It felt light, but it carried the weight of my entire life. Marisol came in. She saw the paper. She saw the look in my eyes. "What is that?" she asked. I handed it to her. She read it. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Layla," she whispered. "They are monsters." "Yes," I said. "They are." I folded the paper carefully and placed it inside the leather portfolio I would carry onto the stage tomorrow. "Are you going to show them?" Marisol asked. I looked at the debt collection letter. Then I looked at the graduation speech I'd been writing. It was a nice speech. It was inspirational. It was safe. I walked over to the trash can and dropped the speech inside. "I am not going to show them," I said. I sat down at my laptop and opened a blank document. "I am going to tell them," I said. I started typing. The words came fast, furious, and sharp. I wasn't writing a speech anymore. I was writing an indictment. Marisol watched me for a moment. Then she walked over and kissed the top of my head. "Give them hell, Doctor. Rios," she said. I didn't stop typing. "I will. I promised. Tomorrow." The lights would be on, and there would be nowhere left to hide. The 48 hours leading up to the ceremony were not spent in celebration. They were spent in construction. Most valedictorians write their speeches to inspire. They write about the future, about the limitless potential of youth, about how we are the architects of tomorrow. They use metaphors about climbing mountains and sailing seas. I was not writing a speech like that. I was drafting a sworn affidavit. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had learned to balance chemical equations and solve for unknown variables. The laptop hummed beneath my wrists. I treated every sentence like a brick in a wall. I weighed each word for structural integrity. I was not looking for poetry. I was looking for precision. I needed the narrative to be unassailable. If I was going to stand on a stage in front of 3,000 people, including the 2 people who had bet against my survival, and tell the truth, I had to make sure the truth was bulletproof. Marisol knew I was writing something different. She walked around the apartment on tiptoes, bringing me cups of herbal tea and plates of sliced fruit. She would pause by the table, her hand hovering over my shoulder, but she never asked to read it. "Do you want me to check the grammar?" she asked once, holding a basket of laundry. I closed the laptop lid gently. "No, Mom," I said. "I want you to hear it with everyone else." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for signs of cracking. She was looking for the scared 13-year-old girl who needed someone to hold the bed rail. She didn't find her. She found a woman who was sharpening a blade. "It is a surprise," I added. "A good one?" she asked. "It is a necessary one," I replied. I wanted it to be a gift for her. If I showed her the draft now, she would worry. She would think about the fallout. She would try to protect me from the potential scandal. I needed to protect her from her own protective instincts. I needed to walk onto that stage alone. On Thursday afternoon, I met Julian for coffee. Julian was a classmate, a brilliant guy who was going into neurology, but he had a cynicism that came from being the son of an investigative journalist. He knew about the guests I had coming. I had told him during a study break that my biological parents had resurfaced. We sat in the corner of the campus coffee shop. The espresso machine hissed in the background. "So, they are actually coming?" Julian asked, spinning his cup on the table. "Yes," I said. "They requested seats." "And you gave them seats?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "That is bold. Or masochistic. It is strategic," I said. Julian leaned in. "Listen, Layla, my dad always says that when people from the past show up after you get famous or successful, they are not there for the reunion. They are there for the harvest." "I know," I said. They have already started harvesting. I told him about the credit card. I told him about the utility bill in my name. Julian's face went dark. That is identity theft. Layla, that is not family drama. That is a felony. He pulled a napkin and took out a pen. You need to lock it down, he said. Before you step on that stage, if you humiliate them publicly, or even if you just ignore them, they might retaliate. If they have your social security number, and they obviously do, they can do a lot of damage in 10 minutes. He scribbled a website on the napkin. Fraud alert, he said. Place a 90-day initial fraud alert on all 3 credit bureaus. Today, right now, it forces creditors to call you before opening any new accounts, and get a monitoring service. He looked at me seriously. And have your paperwork ready, he added. If they try to approach you after the ceremony, do not just walk away. Hand them a legal reason to back off. I took the napkin. Julian was right. I had been so focused on the emotional victory that I had almost neglected the defensive perimeter. I spent the next 2 hours in the library computer lab. I logged into the credit bureau portals. I navigated the menus with the same focus I used for navigating a patient's chart. I placed the fraud alerts. I updated my contact information to ensure no verification calls could go to the old address on Oakwood Drive. Then, I printed the documents. I printed the identity theft affidavit I had prepared with the legal clinic years ago but never filed. I printed the police report draft. I printed a cease and desist letter that explicitly forbade any contact with me or my family members, defining family as Marisol Vega. I put everything in a crisp, manila folder. I labeled it legal in sharp black marker. I slipped it into the bag I would take to the graduation. It sat there next to my cap and gown, a silent sentinel. I wasn't just bringing a speech to the ceremony, I was bringing a shield. That night, the night before the ceremony, the apartment was quiet. Marisol had gone to bed early, exhausted from a double shift she had taken so she could have the graduation day fully off. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I was wearing my pajamas, but in the reflection, I visualized the doctoral tam and the heavy velvet robe. I began to recite the speech. I watched my face. I watched my hands. When I practiced the part about the hospital, about the white blood cell count, my voice trembled slightly. I stopped. No. I whispered to the empty room. I shook my hands out. I took a breath. You are not the victim. I told my reflection. You are the witness. A witness does not tremble. A witness testifies. I started again. This time, I kept my chin up. I forced my voice to drop into my chest. Finding that lower, resonant register that commands attention, I spoke the words with a cold, rhythmic cadence. I stripped the emotion out of the delivery and replaced it with authority. I wasn't asking for pity. I was stating facts. I did this until my throat was dry. I did this until I could look at myself in the mirror and see a doctor, not a daughter. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep. My mind was too active. It was buzzing with a strange, electric energy. It wasn't anxiety. I knew anxiety. Anxiety was a chaotic, spinning feeling. This was focus. This was the feeling of a runner standing in the blocks, waiting for the gun. I pulled a shoebox out from under my bed. It was my archive, my before box. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the lid. Inside were the artifacts of a life I had almost lost. There was the plastic hospital ID bracelet, the plastic yellowing with age, the name Layla Hartwell printed on it in faded ink. It looked so small. It looked like a handcuff for a doll. There was the beanie hat I had worn when I was bald, a bright purple knit cap that Marisol had bought me because she said purple was the color of royalty. There was the first letter Marisol had ever written to the court, the character reference where she stated, I am not just asking to foster a child. I am asking to build a family. And then there was the new addition, the piece of paper I had printed yesterday, the scan of the hospital's social work notes. I picked it up. Father refused to sign payment guarantee. I am not throwing good money after bad. I read the line again. We need to preserve the college fund for the older sibling who has actual potential. I ran my finger over the sentence. It was so cruel, it was almost funny. They had bet on the wrong horse. Brianna, my sister, had dropped out of Yale after 2 semesters due to stress and was currently trying to launch an influencer career in Los Angeles. Funded entirely by my parents, they had preserved the capital for her, and she had burned it on luxury handbags and Coachella tickets. Meanwhile, the bad investment was about to become a doctor of medicine. The irony was delicious, but it was also useful. I looked at the speech on my laptop screen. It was good. It was powerful. But it was missing the final nail in the coffin. I realized I had been holding back. I had been trying to be dignified. I had been trying to take the high road. But the high road doesn't work with people who live in the gutter. I pulled the laptop onto my lap. I scrolled to the middle of the speech, the section where I talked about the obstacles of poverty and illness. I needed to be specific. I needed to say something that the audience would interpret as a tragic backstory, but that Glenn and Kara Hartwell would recognize as a direct quote. I needed a sentence that would act as a sniper shot, invisible to the crowd, but lethal to the target. I started typing. Some people are told they are special. I wrote, I was told I was a calculation. I hit backspace. No, too vague. I typed again. I remember the moment my value was assessed. I remember hearing that my life was not worth the risk of a portfolio. I remember being told that the savings were reserved for the child with actual potential. I looked at the words. Actual potential. It was perfect. It was their words. It was the phrase they had used to justify leaving me to die. When I said those words into the microphone, Glenn would know. He would know that I had the records. He would know that I wasn't just guessing about their motives. I had the transcripts. I added one more line. But I learned that potential is not a currency you inherit. It is a debt you pay to yourself. I saved the document. I closed the box. I put the hospital bracelet back. I didn't need to look at it anymore. I wasn't that girl. I stood up and walked to the window. The sky was beginning to turn a bruised purple over the harbor. The sun was coming. I felt a profound sense of calm. It was the calm of the eye of the storm. I thought about Glenn and Kara sleeping in their hotel room. Probably a 5-star hotel. Probably charging it to a credit card they would struggle to pay off. Trying to maintain the image of the wealthy benefactors. They were probably dreaming of the photos they would take with me. They were dreaming of the caption they would post on social media. Proud parents of the valedictorian. They had no idea. They were walking into an ambush. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I heard Marisol stirring in her room. Good morning, Doctor Rios, she called out sleepily. Good morning, Mom. I called back. I poured 2 cups. I didn't shake. My hand was steady as a rock. Today was the day. I was going to turn on the lights, and I was going to make sure they burned. The graduation arena was a coliseum of light and sound. It was nothing like the quiet, sterile hospital room where my life had effectively ended and restarted 15 years ago. Here, the air smelled of expensive perfume and floor wax. The ceiling was lost in the glare of spotlights that cut through the darkness like scalpels. I sat on the stage, my hands resting on my knees, feeling the heavy velvet of my doctoral regalia. It was hot under the lights, but I did not sweat. My blood ran cool and steady. Below me, the sea of graduates rippled in black and gold. Beyond them, the darkness of the audience seating was punctuated by the flash of cameras. I scanned the front rows. I saw her immediately. Marisol was sitting in the family section. Row A, Seat 1. She was wearing a blue dress that matched the color of the scrubs she had worn the night we met. She was holding a bouquet of yellow roses. Yellow. For the room she had painted for me. She was leaning forward, her face radiant with a pride so intense it seemed to emit its own light. And then, I looked to the section behind the VIPs. Row 4. Seats A and B. Kara and Glenn Hartwell sat there. They looked stiff. Kara was wearing a beige suit that looked expensive but dated. Glenn was checking his watch. They were looking around with polite, tight smiles. Clearly annoyed that they were not in the front row. Clearly wondering why the ushers had directed them to the general admission area. They looked like guests who had arrived at the wrong wedding but were too polite to leave. The dean of the medical school approached the podium. He was a tall man with a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. He adjusted the microphone. The arena went silent. "It is my distinct honor," the dean said, "to introduce our valedictorian. She is a student who has not only achieved the highest academic standing in the history of this program, but has also redefined what it means to care for the most vulnerable among us." He paused for effect. "Please welcome the recipient of the Dean's Medal for Compassionate Medicine, Dr. Leila Rios." The name rang out through the speakers. Rios. I watched Kara. In that split second, the polite smile vanished from her face. Her hand, which had been fanning herself with the program, froze in midair. She looked down at the paper in her lap, blinking rapidly, as if the letters were rearranging themselves before her eyes. She had expected to hear Hartwell. She had expected to hear her own name echoed back to her, validating her ownership of my success. Instead, she heard the name of the woman who had replaced her. Glenn went pale. He looked down at his shoes, his jaw tightening. He understood. In the language of business, a name change was a rebranding. It was a hostile takeover. I stood up. I walked to the podium. The applause was deafening, a physical wave that washed over me. I gripped the sides of the lectern. I waited. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. I let them look at me. "Thank you, Dean," I said. My voice was steady. It did not shake. I looked out at the thousands of faces. "We are told that medicine is a science," I began. "We are taught about cells, about pathways, about the mechanics of survival. We learn that every life has a value that cannot be quantified." I paused. I looked directly at row 4. But I learned a different lesson when I was 13 years old. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I learned that for some, a life is a line item on a spreadsheet. I took a breath. 15 years ago, I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The survival rate was 90%. The prognosis was excellent, but the treatment was expensive. And on a Tuesday afternoon in October, in a room that smelled of rubbing alcohol, I listened to my parents ask the doctor a question. They did not ask if I would live. They asked if the return on investment justified the cost. A ripple of uneasy murmurs went through the crowd. I saw Glenn shift in his seat. He looked like he wanted to stand up, but he was pinned down by the weight of 3,000 people listening. I was told, I continued, my voice hardening, that I was average. I was told that the family savings were reserved for a sibling with actual potential. I was told that saving my life was throwing good money after bad. I saw Kara put her hand over her mouth. She was looking around, terrified that someone would recognize them, terrified that the spotlight would swing their way. I was left in that hospital. I said, I was left to navigate the state system. I was a child who had been discarded because her stock value was too low. I looked at the graduates. But that night, a nurse walked into my room. She did not check my insurance. She checked my fear. She did not bring a calculator. She brought a cup of water with exactly 3 ice cubes, because she noticed that was how I liked it. I smiled, and for the first time, it reached my eyes. She took me home. She painted my walls yellow. She worked double shifts and overnight shifts for 10 years to pay for the textbooks that got me to this podium. She taught me that family is not defined by biology. It is defined by who stays when the room gets dark. I turned my head and looked at Marisol. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. "But there is one last thing," I said, and this is where I went off script. This is where I pulled the pin on the grenade I had been holding for years. There are people here today who believe they are owed a thank you. People who think that their absence was a form of motivation. I leaned into the microphone. To those people, I have a message. You called me a bad investment. You walked away to protect your credit score. I let my voice drop to a lethal whisper. But it is strange. Because 2 days after you left me to die, you used my name and my social security number to open a credit card at an electronics store. You used the identity of your dying daughter to buy a television. The gasp from the audience was audible. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath. The dean turned his head, his eyes wide. Glenn Hartwell was no longer looking at his shoes. He was staring at me with a look of pure horror. He knew. He knew that I knew. He knew that I wasn't just telling a sad story. I was reading his criminal record. You opened utility bills in my name when I was 14. I continued. Relentless. You kept the lights on in your house by destroying the future of the child you abandoned. I stood up straighter. But here's the truth about investments. They compound, and the girl you wrote off as average is now the valedictorian of this medical school. And the debt you left her with? It has been filed with the fraud department. I saw Glenn flinch as if he had been slapped. Truth does not need to scream. I said, borrowing the line I had written in the dark. Truth just needs the lights to be turned on. And the lights are on now. I turned away from row 4. I looked back at row 1. I picked up the heavy gold medal that lay on the podium. This degree belongs to the name on the diploma. I said, it says Dr. Rios. I pointed to Marisol. Mom, please stand up. Marisol stood. She was shaking, sobbing, clutching her yellow roses. The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation that shook the floorboards. Students were cheering. Parents were wiping their eyes. The dean was clapping his hands high above his head. In the middle of that ocean of love and noise, Glenn and Kara Hartwell sat alone. They were isolated in their shame, 2 gray rocks in a sea of color. They looked small. They looked irrelevant. I walked off the stage. I didn't look at them. I walked straight to Marisol and hugged her. The aftermath was swift and bureaucratic. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the courtyard. I was surrounded by classmates, professors, and parents wanting to shake my hand. I saw them at the perimeter. Glenn and Kara were trying to push past the velvet rope that separated the graduates from the general public. They looked desperate. Glenn was sweating. Kara's hair was disheveled. I saw a large man in a security blazer step in front of them. He held a clipboard. I saw Glenn gesturing, pointing at me. I saw him mouth the words, "I am her father." The security guard looked at his clipboard. He shook his head. He pointed to the exit. I had submitted the guest list protocols 3 days ago. No unauthorized access. Individuals on the block list are to be removed from the premises immediately. Glenn looked across the courtyard. Our eyes met. He didn't see anger in my face. He saw indifference. He saw a doctor looking at a virus that had been neutralized. He slumped. He took Kara's arm, and they turned away. They walked out of the gate, disappearing into the parking lot, back to their house on Oakwood Drive where the lights were about to go out. Later that night, my phone showed 14 missed calls from a number I didn't have saved, but recognized. There were voicemails. I didn't listen to them. I sat at my laptop one last time. I opened my email. I typed Glenn's address. Subject: Account closure. I wrote, I saw you at the ceremony. I saw that you understood the message. Regarding your attempts to contact me, do not. I have filed a police report regarding the identity theft from October 25th, 15 years ago, and the utility fraud from June 14th, 14 years ago. The fraud alerts are active on all 3 credit bureaus. The credit card companies have been provided with the affidavit of forgery. They will be contacting you shortly to discuss repayment and legal liability. Do not come to the hospital. Do not come to my home. If you attempt to contact me or Marisol Vega again, I will file for a restraining order using the hospital records of abandonment as evidence of historical neglect. You wanted a business decision. This is it. The account is closed. Dr. Layla Rios. I hit send. Then, I blocked the email address. I blocked the phone number. I closed the laptop. I walked into the living room. Marisol was sitting on the couch, looking at the dean's medal which was resting on the coffee table. She looked up as I entered. Did you do it? She asked. It is done, I said. She opened her arms. I sat down next to her and leaned my head on her shoulder. The house was quiet. It was the good kind of quiet. The kind of quiet you earn after a long storm. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel vengeful. Revenge is when you hurt someone because you are hurting. I wasn't hurting anymore. I wasn't taking revenge. I was just returning the truth to its rightful owner, and I was finally, completely free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey of pain, resilience, and ultimate justice, and I hope Layla's victory resonated with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment down below with your location. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Are you in the US, Vietnam, Europe, or somewhere else entirely? Let's chat in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Emma Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to support the video. And don't forget to press the hype button so this story can reach even more people who might need to hear it. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.